For a long time, it looked as if Ukraine had little chance of surviving Russia's full-scale invasion. But now, 4.5 years into the war, Ukraine's military has managed to hold the front line, backed by Western support and increasingly sophisticated drone technology. At the same time, Russian strikes continue to devastate Ukrainian cities, including scenes like this one in Kyiv. How much longer can both sides endure this grinding war of attrition? These European leaders that we'll see standing with Ukrainian President Zelenskyy are calling for a ceasefire and a return to peace talks. What could that look like? And after the collapse of the German-French fighter jet project, how will Europe pull together on its own defense? On To The Point, we ask Ukraine's drone war forcing Russia to the table? Welcome to this week's To The Point. I'm Javier Arguedas. It's great to have you with us. Let's meet today's guests. Anastasia Tichomirova is a political editor and Russia expert at Germany's weekly Die Zeit. Wolfgang Richter is a retired German colonel and an associate fellow at the Geneva Center for Security Policy. And Andorit Boy is an international editor with Germany's Der Spiegel. She is a former correspondent in Russia and has worked as an information officer for the United Nations in Kyiv. To all of you, welcome and thank you for being with us today. Anastasia, I'd like to start with you. We have seen reports about the situation in the front line, and it seems like there is a turning point, or at least that's what's being said, but we've heard that before. What do you make of the current situation?
So on the battlefield, we can see that Russia is not able to conquer territories it has tried to conquer for 12 years, but Putin still sticks to this goal. He recently said he still wants to conquer the Donbass, eastern Ukraine, until the end of this year. He announced it publicly, and he is not going to take a step back from this goal. This is why also his answer to Zelensky's letter that Zelenskyy published during the economic forum in St. Petersburg was completely negative. Putin ended his remark with the words "Работайте, братья," so it means "keep working, brothers," addressing his negative response to Zelensky's peace initiative. Addressing it to the military elite, to the soldiers, and also to the patriotic society. So, to be honest, I think Russia is now standing at a weaker point, but still Putin is not showing any signs of taking a step back and being ready for a peace.
However, Wolfgang, there are also reports that Russia is making some significant gains in places like Kostiantynivka. How credible are those claims in your view?
Yeah, let me first describe the situation on the battlefield. I mean, we see a mass use of reconnaissance and combat drones, and the consequence of that is that mechanized movements with armored vehicles are almost impossible. That is why both sides now turn to attacks or infiltration rather by small infantry groups, by raiding parties, etc., and try to reconnoiter and try also to conquer terrain. The problem is this front line is very flexible, very volatile, and it is difficult to guess or to judge which side is just in control of which terrain for the moment. But in operational terms, if you look one level higher, we can see that there is a war of attrition. There is a war that stands still in operational terms, and there is little movement. But if you look beyond the battlefield, then you see the long-range strikes of both sides. In the meantime, also Ukraine is able to strike targets in the depths of Russia, up to St. Petersburg, Perm, or sometimes even beyond the Urals. That means they possess long-range cruise missiles and drones and can hold at risk, for example, oil terminals, can damage oil exports, which they obviously have done. And that comes with a loss of reputation. On the other hand, I would not say that this is already their turning point and that is a total standstill. And for the moment, it seems that Ukraine could stabilize the position. But if the efforts of both sides to overcome these drone war effects, and then, of course, other criteria might prevail. For example, the lack of personnel on the Ukrainian side and the lack of missile defense. Also, Germany tries to support with IRIS-T systems, etc. There is a lack of Patriot missiles because the US doesn't or don't deliver directly to Ukraine.
We'll delve
themselves.
into those
Okay.
two aspects. We already heard of the political aspect and the military. We'll take a look at both of them. Andorit, first, despite what we just heard, European leaders do appear to believe this is the moment to bring Russia to the negotiating table. We saw that meeting between Zelenskyy, Macron, Merz and Starmer. How relevant was that meeting for Volodymyr Zelenskyy?
I think I have to say these meetings occur quite frequently. So it's not like Zelenskyy is a rare guest in European capitals, but it's always very important as a show of support. And apparently there is a new initiative to bring Putin to the table. I don't think Putin will agree to that. I don't think they ever actually have the leverage to do that. But they're trying. I would agree with Donald Tusk from Poland that it would be a good idea to have Poland and other countries with them at the table. And I share Donald Tusk's view that talks with Putin at this point are futile. You need to have something that you can actually talk about. So that would be my comment on this Zelensky's visit to London.
Would you think that the result of this meeting would have been different with Poland?
It's always different because Tusk has a different view a different approach when it comes to how to talk to Putin, or does it even make sense to talk to Putin? Tusk has always been very skeptical of that. So it would have been a different discussion, definitely.
Let's have a closer look at the reaction that we saw from that meeting in Russia. It was framed as an open invitation to a ceasefire and talks on a potential peace deal. But Russian President Vladimir Putin quickly dismissed these efforts, projecting confidence that victory is still within reach.
I see no point in meeting. A meeting would only benefit Ukraine because it wants to stop the Russian advance. And as for the military operations, they will certainly end one day, when we have achieved our goals. Unfortunately, the Russian side has once again chosen war. I think many people around the world will be disappointed about that. So we must increase the pressure on Russia. And I thank everyone who is helping us do that.
Anastasia, we've just heard President Putin's position. He's shown little sign of backing away from his maximalist demands. Walk us through what Russia is still insisting on.
So, yeah, Russia is still insisting on its military goals, the goals why Putin has started this war. He started this war because he wants to capture Donbass. He wants to increase his influence on former Soviet territory, and because he sees Ukraine, and especially Eastern Ukraine, Kyiv, as part of the historical Russian territory, what is not true, but this is still something he's projecting on. But I think it's important to point out that both remarks like Zelensky's letter, but also Putin's response were addressed to totally different publics. So I think Zelensky's letter was primarily not addressed to Putin, but more to the international audience, to European leaders, but also to the Ukrainian and as well to the Russian public, as he said, or as he described in the letter, that the war is a personal choice of Putin, and that it's also Putin's personal choice to end the war, while Putin's response was more speaking to his own power base, to the system that keeps him in power and that is increasingly showing discontent with the war itself, but also with the security in Moscow. As Ukrainian drones are reaching Moscow and St. Petersburg, Putin is not fulfilling the so-called social contract in Russia anymore, that if people stay away from politics, he ensures their security and stability. And this is cracking right now. So yeah, in Ukraine, it is important also to point out that Zelenskyy is now in a position of strength, not of weakness. And he is trying to send a message that Ukraine is willing to talk. It's not a party that is blocking peace. Ukraine is willing to negotiate, but not from a position of weakness, from a position of strength.
And yet, Andorit, everything we just heard, all the discourses, are the same that we heard in the past, that this is a personal choice of Putin, that essentially Ukraine is able to attack Russian territory. What's the point, from your point of view, in inviting Putin to the negotiating table again at this point? Is it more than a PR stunt, if you will?
I think it is not. I mean, there is not going to be a fruitful dialogue between these two individuals, Zelenskyy and Putin. So I don't think it makes sense to bring them together at the negotiating table while the homework has not been done, if you will. There need to be, and probably not public, but a secret diplomacy needs to be doing their job. They need to establish a way forward, something that both parties can agree on, some initial ceasefire, some precautions to ensure this is maintained and secured, and lots of open questions. So I do think any meeting between Putin and Zelenskyy at this point would be a PR stunt, while there is nothing they could agree on. And Putin, I think, would only come to a meeting when there is something to sign that he is happy with.
Speaking of, Wolfgang, Russia is facing criticism for not making concessions, but do you see Ukraine offering any meaningful concessions in this latest proposal?
Let me add first that we have to analyze the war goals exactly. It's more than just territorial gains. It's about the strategic balance, as Russia sees that. We know for many years that they pursue the goal that NATO should not extend to Ukraine, that no Western troops should be present in Ukraine. At the same time, Putin has said that Ukraine might join in the EU, but the EU should not develop to a military bloc, in particular not a military bloc against Russia. So all that could come on the negotiation table, and these are also issues when it comes to the future European security order, for which the Europeans should have a clear position. At the moment, I don't see that, and I don't see that they can offer something. And if you go into negotiations, of course not publicly, then you would put on the table all these issues and negotiate it in a very schematic way, so that you find compromises. And if you find compromises on one point, you might see the compromise, the preparedness to strike a compromise on the other side on other points. So this is the normal process of negotiations, and this has not been done publicly. And here I agree fully with Andorit.
And of course, there's another party, Andorit, that we have to include in this equation. Europe seems to be a bit alone in this right now. Talking about U.S. support, what's the perception in Ukraine about the country that should be the most important ally in this war?
So clearly, Zelenskyy and the Ukrainian government is not counting on President Trump and his administration as much as they did last year when there was this big diplomatic push. I think there's been a lot of disappointment with the American side. The summit in Anchorage in Alaska, in which basically gave Putin the big stage and left out the Ukrainians. So there was. There is a big disappointment, and now the Ukraine seems to be hoping the Europeans can do something for them. The problem is that the Europeans are not the middlemen, because clearly from Russia's point of view, they are Ukraine's allies, and de facto they are. We are supporting, as Europe are supporting Ukraine heavily, and so for negotiations, there would need to be another mediator.
And Anastasia, Putin has backed former German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder as a possible mediator in this conflict. He has close ties to the Kremlin. Is that a realistic option?
I don't think so, because Schröder has the same position as Russia. Schröder, I think Putin does that as a kind of PR stunt, because then also he himself can portray himself as willing to negotiate, willing to peace, also to calm the Russian public. Because we can see in Russian public the discontent with Putin is rising. People do not feel secure. People do not understand why this war can be prolonged. There's a certain fatigue among the Russian public. Almost, I mean, between 60 and 70% of Russians want the war to end. So I think this is why Putin is bringing Schröder in, and no one really believes that this will have an effect. But Putin's ratings are the lowest right now since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. So he needs to rise the public support in order to calm the discontent. One other point I want to make is that like fatigue or the will the war to end does not mean the same as willing to achieve peace, because while most Russians will say that they hope for the war to end in this year, at the same time only a small amount will accept if Russia gives back the seized Ukrainian territory, if Russia will accept responsibility. So I think these are two different points, different aspects.
And yet that fatigue can be very crucial for Ukraine. In war, both sides try to reach the negotiating table from a position of strength. For Ukraine, that means making the war impossible to ignore inside Russia. Recent long-range drone strikes suggest that strategy may be working.
Russian power and strength were what the Economic Forum was meant to showcase. International guests and Russians from across the country arrived with their families. But fear is growing. Ukrainian drones are hitting targets far from the front lines. The war is being felt right in the middle of St. Petersburg. We haven't felt safe lately because it's a very troubled time. There have been air raids. On Crimea, gas is becoming scarce due to Ukrainian attacks on transport routes. Russian tourists can no longer get home. Supermarket shelves are emptying. There is rationing in Sevastopol. They told us at the store in Sevastopol we can only buy 3 packs of noodles each. All of this is politically sensitive for Putin, and the window for securing a victory against Ukraine is closing. How far is Russia still prepared to go?
Wolfgang, Russia still is a military superpower, no matter how many drones fall in Russian territory. Are these drone attacks such a significant step forward for Ukraine?
It is a significant change if you compare the situation today with that one of 2023 or 24. That is for sure. On the other hand, these drone attacks have caused some damage to the oil terminals, to oil exports of Russia, and that is felt. We speak about minus 20% maybe of oil exports. On the other hand, the air defense has some holes, of course, as we can see in because still some missiles and drones can get through, even if a lot of missiles and drones can be defended against. On the other hand, it is not the case that Russia is now on the verge to crumble or to lose this war. This I don't believe, because if you see the front line, if all the measures, be it improvised measures or new technologies, if they can overcome the drone wall effect at the front line, then other factors come to the forefront. For example, the personnel question, and Ukraine has problems with recruiting personnel, but also the air defense, and particularly the missile defense question. For example, Patriot missiles are lacking now because the US has fired a lot of Patriots, of course, and their allies in the Gulf War. And at the same time, the storage site should be filled again, and it is not easy now to acquire these Patriots. So this is a lack for the Ukrainian air defense. And if this, as I said, the standstill on the front line comes to an end, then the war could turn into another direction.
Mm-hmm. You just mentioned the inability in part of European allies to provide weapons. We just saw France and Germany pull the plug on their joint fighter jet project, FCAS. What does that say about Europe's ability to sustain long-term support for Ukraine?
Yeah, the first thing I want to say is it shows that the selfish ideas of certain firms in France and Germany do not come together, obviously. A French firm wants to be dominant in the development of this future aircraft system. It's not an aircraft alone, it is a complete system. It has something to do with the French role on nuclear weapons and with the experience with that kind of fighters. That's why they claim the leading role. On the other hand, I would not exaggerate the result of that. Of course, it's regrettable, but there will be some experience left over that can be put forward for the future projects. Digitalization, for example, and the drone network for an aircraft. And we see a lot of other European projects, armament projects, that run quite well. So I would avoid generalizing this event.
All right. Andorit, we spoke about the psychological effects of these latest drone attacks and the Ukrainian attacks on Russia. How is the psychological part in Ukraine at the moment? We've seen moments where it was very good. We've seen moments where there was also a lot of disappointment within the Ukrainian population. Has that changed?
I think there is same as in Russia, and even more, actually much more probably than in Russia, a really huge fatigue. So while the Ukrainians are showing a remarkable resilience, I keep hearing when I go to Ukraine more often, don't tell us, admire us for our resilience, because actually behind the scenes we're also just very tired and we want this to end, but not at all cost. So while there is an increasing, and over the years has been an increasing readiness to accept a freezing of the front line and accept the de facto reality that part of the Ukrainian territory is under Russian control, Ukrainians are not willing to legally give up the four regions that have been annexed since 2022. And the parts of other regions as well. So that is the situation, I would say, and there is no easy way out.
So it seems to be the same disposition that we see among the Russian population. Anastasia, there's another important aspect that we haven't touched on, which is the finances. Russia's military is apparently facing financial strains, with the Kremlin reportedly accelerating expropriations of oligarch assets. Do you think Western sanctions have finally had a real impact?
I'm not an expert on this special matter, but what we can see is that, for example, Russia is having troubles to find military personnel to go and fight on the front line, as the death rate is still very high. So the loans for serving in the military are being raised because it's becoming more difficult to find people who are ready to do it. So this is what I can say about it.
There is another aspect with which these countries, both of them, are trying to counter the lack of personnel, Wolfgang, and it is foreign military servants that are apparently fighting this war too. What do you make of that phenomenon? How relevant is it at the moment?
Personnel is, of course, relevant. Recruiting of personnel is very relevant. We see a lack of possibilities for Ukraine to recruit new personnel. There is some resistance. Many young Ukrainians or Ukrainians in the age of military service flee to other countries, in particular in the EU. There are hundreds of thousands who don't want to return. And on the Russian side, as has been said already, the Russian state has to spend a lot of money to get new recruits, and that, of course, is burdening the state budget. But still, they shy away from a new wave of mobilization. That would be unpopular. But in my view, the Russians have the upper hand for the moment, despite the big losses they have to suffer. For the future, when the drone wall can be overcome by new technical means, that is, of course, then a reason to believe that the Russians could then make progress. Obviously, this is the belief that Putin has. I think both sides are not quite realistic on these kind of beliefs. And if I look at the economy, because you asked about the sanctions, we have seen that the Russian economy in 2023-24 had still an increase between 4 and 5%. In the last year, it was only 1%. And Putin said laconically that is not worse than the EU countries.
Right. We're running out of time. I only have a yes/no question, only yes or no for all three of you. Can Russia actually be pushed into talks? Anastasia? Just a yes or no.
But with much more effort.
Okay. Wolfgang?
Russia wants to talk. The question is the conditions where we cannot agree.
And Andorit, just a yes or no?
Not yet, maybe in the future.
We'll see how that goes. Thank you, all three of you, and of course to you for watching. See you next week. Take care and goodbye.